Hi, I'm Elizabeth Morrison. I'm an ADHD clinician, coach, and neuroinclusive systems designer. This is Quirky Apes. My background spans psychology, neuroscience, math, sociology, evolution, org development, and political science, which is a lot of ways to say I am extremely interested in how humans work. So today I'm wondering, does how you spend your time, energy, and attention actually match what you say matters? This question does sound simple to answer, but it can have large implications. Stating a value feels like honoring it. The brain gets a dopamine hit just from the declaration. The feeling of progress arrives before any action does. It This is why someone can genuinely believe their family is the top priority while consistently choosing work when the two do compete. This gap reveals itself under pressure. When two priorities compete for the same hour, whatever wins consistently is usually the priority. Repeated over months, these choices form a picture that we can examine. There are three ways to read what you actually have yourself invested in. I call them receipts. So we have three receipts, the proof of purchase for where your resources really went to. The first receipt is time. Try reading your calendar like it belongs to a stranger. What does that person actually value? What is protected no matter what? Time is the most objective receipt. It is quantifiable. Now, our second receipt is energy. What gets the sharp, fully present version of you? What gets the remainder? The quality of presence reveals priority more honestly than hours logged. And our third receipt is attention. What does the mind return to when it's unprompted, in its idle moments, or mid conversation, or maybe late at night? What operates below the conscious level? What surfaces during quiet moments? And that's genuine information about what the mind has actually prioritized. And then once you've read the receipts, the question becomes how to close that gap. Intent gets built Intent gets built into daily life through four mechanisms. A decision filter is a pre-made answer to a recurring trade-off. When two things compete, intent answers usually before deliberation ever starts. Protecting morning hours for focused work can be a decision made once with a clear head, and then we can choose to honor it from then on and do that with a trained decision filter. Structure means that time is blocked and genuinely fixed. The environment is designed so that the intended behavior is the natural next step. Decisions are made in advance. The path of least resistance becomes shaped deliberately. An edge case test asks when two legitimate priorities collide under real pressure, which gets protected? A response that is consistent and quick indicates the intent is genuinely built in. The edge case is where the hierarchy becomes visible. And lastly, there's identity. When intent becomes part of how someone understands themselves, it runs as the default. It's activating the DMN that I discussed last time. Identity generates its own momentum. Saying I'm trying to exercise more requires a fresh act of motivation each day. Saying I am someone who moves every day shifts the framing so that consistency becomes an expression of who you are. To understand why this design work matters, it helps to understand what the brain is really doing underneath that gap. Leon Fessinger identified cognitive dissonance way back in 1957. Participants paid $1 to tell someone a boring task was interesting, subsequently rated that task as more enjoyable than those paid $20 to say the same thing. The mechanism is specific. When the external justification for the behavior is large, the belief stays intact. When the external justification is small, The mind resolves that inconsistency by updating the belief. The system is seeking coherence. The truth is the casualty when coherence is at stake. The gap between what someone does and what they believe about what they do closes most often through a revision of belief. The behavior stays and the story changes. Someone who has said their family is their priority but keeps choosing work often just quietly reframes themselves as someone who expresses care through providing. Slightly new story, the same behavior. The three receipts function as an external mirror of sorts. Internal reflection alone is processed by the same exact system that's generating that rationalization. Calendar data is harder to reinterpret than memory. There is a second mechanism as well. The brain has a registered intent system. Once an intent is formed, the brain monitors for opportunities to act on it. Vivid mental simulations of doing something particularly satisfies that system. Planning, visualization, talking about your goals, they all generate a mild version of the completion signal. The doing feels slightly less urgent afterwards. Peter Gollwitzer's research extended this. He posited that when a goal is tied to someone's identity and they receive social recognition for that goal, the recognition substitutes for the actual achievement. The person who announces they're writing a novel, for instance, and receives acknowledgement has received symbolic confirmation of that identity. That confirmation partially satisfies what the finished novel would satisfy. The goal relevant behavior becomes less urgent to the nervous system. Every conversation about a goal draws from the motivational account. Gollwitzer found this effect was specific to identity relevant goals. Goals framed as tasks to complete did not show the same substitution. The substitution happens when the goal is functioning as an identity symbol, as something that communicates who the person is. And our third mechanism is present bias. People often discount future rewards hyperbolically. The discount rate is steep near the present, and it flattens as events move further out. This produces preference reversal. People choose $50 today over $100 in a month. The monetary difference is obvious. The time difference is important. The immediacy changed. Person who genuinely wants to exercise more next month and consistently chooses otherwise is responding accurately to the math. The future reward is worth less precisely because it is the future. Identity addresses this directly. When a behavior is part of someone's identity, honoring it carries immediate reward in the form of self-consistency. Violating it carries an immediate cost. Both are present moment experiences. This brings the value of the future behavior into the present. The choice now communicates immediate reward in the form of self-consistency. Violating it carries that immediate cost. Both are those present moment experiences. This brings the value of the future behavior into the present moment. The choice now competes with a present tense sense of who they are. That's a different structural problem than competing against discounted future reward. At a neurological level, that default mode network is where all of this lives. And you'll notice that in my videos, it will be popping up quite a bit. The DMN activates during rest. It handles the self-referential thinking, imagining past and future events, social cognition, and narrative construction. It's the network that's stitching experiences into a coherent story about who you are and what matters to you. The DMN reflects priority hierarchies that were built largely outside of conscious control, shaped by decades of reinforcement, emotional weighting, and early experience. A person can sincerely believe that family is their top priority, while the network is running during the day in their idle moments, consciously surfacing work problems and status concerns. The DMN is reporting what the system has been conditioned to treat as important. The conditioning does not update quickly in response to just stating your intentions. What surfaces in idle moments is genuine information, and it's worth taking seriously as data. The basal ganglia runs a parallel process. It packages repeated sequences of behavior into compressed single units. Chunking. Research tracking rats navigating a T maze showed high neurological activity when first learning that route and progressively lower activity as the route became habitual. Activity spiked again at the beginning and end of the sequence and went quiet in the middle. The middle of the sequence, once chunked, runs as a single stored command. The basal ganglia registers repetition. Whether the behavior serves stated goals is absolutely irrelevant to that chunking process. Habits that undermine the stated priorities are built by exactly the same mechanism as habits that support them. For changing habits, the cue and the reward tend to be stable. The cue triggers the loop. The reward is what the loop is actually seeking. The routine is the path that the brain has learned to take between them. Attacking the routine directly removes the path to the reward without addressing the craving that the cue produced. So the craving intensifies. Effective change then involves identifying what reward the existing routine delivers and finding a different routine that satisfies the same underlying craving. The cue stays, the reward stays. The path between them is what changes. Willpower is working alongside deeply wired, emotionally reinforced, automatically triggered patterns that have been accumulating for years. Executive functioning is sensitive to cognitive load, to stress, emotional state, and to decision volume. Self regulation becomes way more effortful under conditions of depletion. Reducing the number of moments that require active self regulation is a legitimate strategy. At a systems level, the gap between stated and lived intent persists because the feedback system has three structural failures. The signal is inaccurate. Self assessment is filtered through motivated reasoning. People recall instances of living their values way more vividly than instances where their behaviors fell short. The signal that something is off is processed by the same mind that has an interest in concluding everything's fine. The signal is delayed. The consequence of the misaligned intent often emerges years later. A strained relationship, maybe a career that's drifted from exactly what matters. The signal eventually arrives, but by the time the connection to the daily decisions has produced, it's faded. Each individual decision felt small, felt reasonable. Their cumulative effect took years to manifest. The signals often illegible. A general sense of dissatisfaction is real information. It does not point to a specific cause, though. The three receipts address this directly. They break the aggregate experience into three specific, examinable dimensions. Each is traceable to a concrete, recent behavior. The environment compounds all of this. Context shapes behavior more powerfully and more consistently than motivation. Studies in hospital cafeterias, for instance, found that repositioning food to make healthier options more visible changed eating patterns. No change in education, motivation, or stated goals. And Fogg's research formalized the underlying principle. Behavior is a function of motivation, ability, and a prompt. Of the three, ability, or how easy or hard the behavior is to perform in the current context is the most reliably engineerable. Motivation fluctuates. Prompts can be missed. Reducing friction so the intended behavior is the natural next step is the most durable lever. Every physical and digital space a person inhabits has a default built in. The phone on the desk has a prompt. The open browser tab is a prompt. The arrangement of the workspace, the position of the gym bag, the distance between the person and whatever pulls them off course. All of it is architecture already influencing their behavior. Those defaults were set by product designers, architects, previous habits, or whoever arranged the space last. The environment is already running a program. The question is whether that program was written by the person who's living inside of it. Identity operates as a regulatory system, layered over all of this. When a behavior is part of identity, violating it does not feel like failing to do something. It feels like being someone you are not. Motivation says behavior would be good to do. Identity says doing something otherwise would be self contradictory. The set point is established through repeated behavior, through self labeling, and through social confirmation. The thermostat monitors for deviation, and then it generates a specific discomfort when the pattern is broken, a signal that the self is inconsistent. That signal initiates corrective pressure through the pull of self consistency. External suggestions to make an exception are met with internal friction that arises organically. The identity does the arguing. A rule can be argued around. A goal can be deferred. An identity cannot be violated without the person experiencing it as a contradiction of who they are. This same mechanism runs on whatever identity is established, including identities that were not deliberately chosen. Someone who's come to think of themselves as always busy, always available, always putting others first will experience the same corrective pressure when those patterns are interrupted, regardless of whether those patterns serve their stated values. The useful design question is what the identity's set point actually is, and whether it was chosen deliberately. All three layers, psychological, neurological, and the systems layer, point at the same thing from different vantage points. The gap between stated and lived intent is a design problem. Design problems have design solutions. The psychological layer rationalizes the gap between the motivated reasoning. The neurological layer automates existing patterns. The environmental layer reinforces whatever defaults are already in place. With deliberate infrastructure, receipts, filters, structures, and identity anchors, all three layers can be oriented toward what genuinely matters. Willpower fluctuates. Motivation comes and goes. Memory is selective. Emotion shifts priority in the moment. A well-designed system compensates for all of these. It remains functional precisely when the individual resolve is the most under strain. The intent was real. It needed something built around it to carry it forward. Now, if you or your organization could use an LPC, a coach, consultant, or if you need some training from someone who thinks like this, I'm available at creativesolutionscoaching.com or on the socials.